The next shape you need to draw is quite a tricky one. So you need to make sure that you've got a ruler, and you need to make sure that you're working nice and slow, and maybe even if you have some graph paper at home, you might decide to work on that so that you can make sure that all of your horizontal and vertical lines are going straight up and down or straight across. So we need to use single point perspective for this one. So let's make a little dot over here, just like the one that we can see in the picture. And then we need to start a fair way away from our dot so that we're allowing ourselves room to do that single point perspective. So I'm going to make sure that I measure everything. That's 1 centimeter from here to here. So I'm just going to do this front rectangle first, and I'm going to copy those measurements exactly as I see them in the picture. So making sure to use my ruler. And checking the height, I can see that that's 1.5. So then I'm marking that in with my ruler, making sure that my lines go either straight across or straight up and down. If you decide that you want to go in and freehand your drawing, you can have a go, but you need to make sure that you're checking it with your ruler afterwards to make sure that it's accurate, because you will be marked on how accurately you can draw this. So then you're going to join up all of your corners with your single point perspective dot. And remembering that we're going to erase some of these lines later, so we need to make sure that they're nice and light so we can't see them too much. Our next step is to then measure the dark lines. So we've got about 1.8 or 1.9. And we're going to make that line a little bit darker. And then we do the same here. So that's about 1.6. And then the same on this line, but notice that this line is not as long as the other lines. It's a little bit shorter. So now if we have a look at this line here, this line goes straight up and down the same way as this one does. So we need to make sure that that line also goes straight up and down. So if you've mismeasured any of these lines, it might go on an angle in or an angle out. So if you find that that's the case, just use your ruler to check what straight up and down is there, and make sure it's also straight up and down here. And so I was probably a millimeter out there. So then we've got this line drawn in, and we can see that this one comes straight out. And again, that is a parallel line. It's running parallel with all of the other side to side horizontal lines. So I've got a parallel line here that's horizontal. I've got one here. So this one needs to run exactly the same direction as those other lines. But I need to make sure that I get it the right length. So I'm measuring that as 4 centimeters. So I'm going to make a mark at 4, and I'm going to make sure that that line is nice and dark. So that's 4 centimeters. Make sure you go nice and slow and don't rush your drawing, because you want it to be as neat as possible. You need to work much slower than I'm working because you are not doing a demonstration. So now I'm measuring this one, but this one's pretty easy because we can see that it obviously needs to line up with the end of this one here. And paying attention to the fact that it starts just below that corner, not halfway down, not 3/4 of the way down, probably about 1/4 of the way down is where it starts. You can measure that distance if you want to. Now we've got another vertical line, so this line goes straight up and down. We need to make sure that this line goes straight up and down too. The next thing we need to do is measure this line across the back here. You can pause the video as you go and do this step by step instead of watching the whole thing if you want to. So I'm seeing that that one is also about 4 centimeters. Now I'm just looking at this and I think that I've made that one a little bit too high. So I'm going to fix that problem by extending that out so that I've got space to do that top line, because I don't want it to be too close. I don't want it to be too close to this line. If I had drawn it in here, they would have got very close. So sometimes you can go back and check your measurements if you need to. But sometimes you need to, if you're in a hurry, just quickly make some adjustments where you think they need to be made, because at the end of the day, we are artists and we should be able to observe where we need to fix things. Okay, so this one is also a single point perspective line. So I'm going to look at that dot and that corner right on the end there. You can see that runs through where I've just drawn that line. So then I can make that line a little bit darker. So then if you want to, you can go over all those lines with a pen or a darker pencil, or you can leave them as they are. It's up to you. But that is how you draw the L-shaped rectangular prism. The next one is probably a bit tricky again. You still need your ruler, but you need to freehand draw these curvy lines in. So we can do the same thing again. We can start by measuring that base there. So that's about 2.5 centimeters. And then notice how this line up the back here is exactly the same width. It's also 2.5 centimeters. If I imagine a line going straight up and down there, those corners are almost on top of each other. It's probably a tiny bit to the left of it. So I want to start my next line about the same distance above and starting my corner above that other corner. So keeping my lines horizontal, 2.5 centimeters. So now I've drawn this line and this line. The next step is just to connect them up. So I'm drawing nice and lightly again, and then I can darken my lines later. So connecting them up like that. And then we've got this sort of angled rectangle. So we're looking at it from an angle. So the next thing we need to do is imagine the shape of these. So how high is it coming up? I can see that it's not going past that corner. Okay. I can measure how high it is if I want to, or I can just freehand draw it. Again, we're drawing nice and lightly. We need to make sure that when we draw that semicircle shape, that we're not leaning it to one side. We also need to make sure that we're not making it too pointy. Imagine that on that line there is a circle. So you're basically drawing a semicircle. You're drawing that top section. So if you imagine that you drew this shape and then you copied that on the bottom, that's not a circle, that's a love heart. Or if you drew this shape, that's not a circle, that's an egg. So it needs to be a semicircle, as if there was another one on the bottom here. You need to then repeat exactly the same thing on the other side there. Again, making sure not to angle them or squish them or anything that's going to make them not look like circles. You can then take your ruler and connect up, so running parallel to this line, connect up the top of those semicircles. So this line and this line run parallel with each other, and that's that line there. The next thing we need to do is this little section that comes out the side here. So you might start by measuring these lines. So look at where it starts. It starts about here. You can measure that if you want to, and then measure how far out that line comes. So that line is just a little bit less than 2.5 centimeters. So again, when I draw my lines, I'm making sure that all of my horizontal lines run parallel. They all go straight across. It's not coming down on an angle. It's not going up on an angle. It's going straight across. Same with this line up here. Looking at where it starts, you can measure from here to here if you want to. And we need to draw exactly the same length. So what did we say? Just a little bit less than 2.5. A good way to check then is to make sure that these lines here are parallel. So they both go in exactly the same direction. We don't want them doing this or this. They need to be parallel. So whatever direction my pencil moves for that one, it needs to move in the same direction for the other one. And then all I need to do is my semicircles again. This time it's a little bit more, probably a little bit higher. It's more of an egg shape if we imagine that there was one at the bottom there. It's not a complete circle because we're looking at it more from an angle. And then we draw that top piece in again, just like we did over here. We need to connect the top of those semicircles. So again, then you can go over your main lines, or you can leave it looking see-through if you want to. So going over the lines that you would be able to see if it wasn't see-through. And then we erase all of our measuring lines. And now we've got a bit of a igloo happening. So if you want to, you can shade these, but I'm not expecting you to. You won't be marked on your shading. I'm just expecting you to draw the actual shape. All the best. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to keep your work somewhere safe for when you return to school.